NASCAR drivers and other racing drivers can be remembered for a multitude of great things, both on and off of the track. But most of those remembered for most of their off-the-track deals are for major reasons. Usually, or at least in a good amount of these, it's for crimes. But for former driver St. James Davis, it would be for a much more horrifying reason. So let's get into it. On October 24th, 1943, the man who would come to be known as St. James Davis was born, though his original name was White Cloud. And White Cloud would take up an interest for racing, which is where his more well-known name would come into play. On the other end of this story, and the other end of the world, would be what would be the most unlikely of characters in most circumstances: a young chimpanzee in Tanzania, an infant. This chimp in 1966 had been a victim of poaching, as a young male's mother was killed by them when he was only just a day old. And this is where the deckhand of a chip would be coming into play to save the baby animal. It was none other than St. James, who had witnessed the mother's death at the hands of the humans. St. James had been on the ship crew as it was an escape for him. He had skipped out on his wedding with his high school sweetheart LaDonna to instead work on one of his race cars. News of this spread quickly around the town they lived in, and he ditched only to end up in Africa on this ship, though he quickly devoted everything in his life to this baby chimp, abandoning his post and spending weeks foraging for food and care for the infant in the Tanzanian wilderness. This would be until German missionaries would help him back to America, where he'd bring home his new chimp named Mo with him. Once homeside, his bride-to-be LaDonna was still there for him and understandably mad, but quickly had fallen in love with little Mo. By 1970, they had patched things up, and between them, they would be getting married, without a ditching groom this time. And in this wedding, Mo, whom they had considered to be their adopted son, attended and participated in the wedding, being, in LaDonna's words, a combination of a flower thrower and a best man. Over the coming years, St. James especially would become more and more connected to Mo and look at him as his own son. It was to the point that when LaDonna was found that she had cancer in 1971 and had to get a full hysterectomy, St. James would console her and tell her not to worry by saying that, quote, "We already have a kid." And so they raised him as a human child. They would have him living with them in their California home, eating in restaurants, watching TV, riding bikes, and even teach him how to write his own name and write like a human child would. And he'd become a bit of a local celebrity, as not very often do you find chimps living in a community with humans. The first sign of trouble, though, came in 1977, where the now 10-year-old Mo had bitten the finger of a woman, causing a soon-dismissed lawsuit against St. James. Meanwhile, though, through all of this, St. James and LaDonna were working their way up the racing ranks. By 1978, the Davises were becoming one of the first husband and wife combos in racing to be a driver-crew chief combo. LaDonna did just about everything for St. James. She was the crew chief, the owner, and even a crew member and engineer for her husband. In the late 70s, they would race in the Winston Grand National West Series, which is now known as the Arca Menards West Series today. He also tried his luck at the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. And this is where St. James Davis's name went fully into effect, as NASCAR would not allow him to race under the name White Cloud. Over his career, he'd race part-time in a white 22 car that had the look of clouds on it because of this, and he would attempt more races. In the ARCA West Series, he scored a career-high 9th in points by 1997 at the age of 53, but in the Cup Series, he had 17 attempts at races, missing out every single time. Though he would be a part of NASCAR history in 1988, participating in the Goodyear NASCAR 500 over in Melbourne, Australia. This would be the first ever NASCAR race held outside the United States. Davis would run 2 laps and start and park the event, finishing last. Meanwhile, through the 80s and 90s, they both still had Mo living with them. Also over this time, residents in the surrounding areas had become more and more worried and were giving more and more complaints, as well as having more and more protests from animal rights activists who said that Mo should not have been kept as a pet. By the late 90s, because of these worries, he's being kept in a 10-foot by 12-foot cage inside their home. On August 16, 1998, Mo would escape, though. He'd been scared when a welder working near his cage had let a live wire touch the metal cage around him and gave him an electric shock. This would mean he would quickly escape in fear, and police would chase the chimp around and try and close off the neighborhood in an attempt to contain him. In his panic, he dented one of the police cars in an attack and mauled an officer's right hand. Still, though, through heavy legal fights, the couple kept Mo in their home. But in 1999, he'd strike again, biting the tip off of a woman's finger in the house who had stuck her finger in the cage to pet Mo. At this point, local officials stepped in and seized the ape, and he'd be relocated to an animal sanctuary. While the couple fought to regain custody of him, they repeatedly were denied and only allowed to visit Mo but never touch him or hug him, which deprived him of much needed consolation and activity with somebody, a companion. It was only up until 2004, though, where he'd be relocated again to a sanctuary called Animal Haven Ranch, where they could finally hug and interact with Mo again and act almost as this kind of family they had. At which point, they visited him every week, sometimes multiple times a week, to play with him, interact with him, and try and get some kind of stimulus to him. Mo would be kept separate from the rest of the primates, but everything would change on Mo's 39th birthday, on March 3rd, 2005. St. James and LaDonna had visited Mo and brought him a birthday cake to eat with them at a picnic table. The main problem with this is that it was in the view of all of the other primates and chimps. Chimpanzees are very territorial animals, and they have complex hierarchies when it comes to food and everything else in their lives. Mo, being an outsider, meant that he wasn't even at the bottom of their hierarchy, he wasn't even in it. Chimps can also become quite jealous and incredibly aggressive in these situations, and 2 of the chimps, named Buddy and Ollie, were enraged, and seeing how one of the workers had accidentally left their cages unlocked, they broke out of their enclosures. LaDonna, not even noticing at the time, was cutting the cake before she then noticed one of them charging at her. And in an instant, one of those chimps would jump her, biting off one of her thumbs. St. James would push LaDonna underneath the picnic table and then try to protect her from both chimps, but this only made him the target of both apes. They attacked his face, taking his nose, as well as his hands, feet, arms, legs, and genitals, as well as just about any other part of his body that they could get their hands on. In the madness, other chimps not involved or wanting to attack had escaped, as it took 5 minutes or so of this before the 2 attackers would be shot down by the owner's son. In all of this, Mo was stuck in shock, cowering in fear in his cage of what the other chimps were doing, while his father figure, St. James, would be taken to multiple trauma centers and left in a 6-month coma to recover. To this day, he is in many ways immobilized from the normal ways of life. And as St. James did recover, he couldn't visit Mo as much even when he was able. And with all of this, Mo would be changed forever in many ways. In June of 2008, though, he'd be reported missing, now having escaped from his enclosure. Another hunt was underway again to find him. Some reports had seen him heading towards the nearby mountains and forests, and while even helicopters were deployed to try and find him, to this day, he has never been located, and California still has him listed as an unsolved disappearance. There's 3 main theories to Mo's fate, though, and none probably have or will ever be proven completely. The most unlikely is that Mo is still living in the California forest to this day. He'd be 57 years old at the moment, which is definitely pushing the age limits for chimps, but not impossible. Though seeing how Mo was pretty much treated as a human child and never learned how to live without humans helping him, this continues to be the most unlikely of scenarios. Others speculate that Mo had been broken out by activists who wanted to free him, or somebody who had seen him in the publicity and wanted to own him, and to this day, maybe he is secretly living with different caretakers. But the most likely is that he is dead. Either he escaped and his remains have yet to be found, or he died in the sanctuary and to avoid publicity, it was covered up. Regardless, I think this is an important lesson that keeping highly intelligent animals, especially primates, as pets is not a good idea and shouldn't happen. But that's just my take. Let me know what you think about this all in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great racing content and other wild stories like this. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support. And until next time, have a good one.